Well, tonight I'm here in the modern Turkish city of Izmir, and as you can see, it's a bright and colourful place that's fully awake and buzzing well into the night. Izmir was built on top of ancient Smyrna, and it was to the Christians gathered here that Jesus had his second message in the book of Revelation, chapter 2. Now, have you ever had the privilege of getting to live somewhere really beautiful? I've been blessed enough to live in a number of really picturesque towns in Wales before, and I also spent some time living in the country of South Korea, which is so bright and colourful that a number of friends and I took up photography while we were living out there. Well, Smyrna was known as being one of the most beautiful places you could possibly live anywhere in the ancient world. It was another port city with a fierce rivalry with Ephesus, which was about 40 miles south of here. It had less than half the population of Ephesus, but where that city was considered to be quite a crowded place, built up higgledy-piggledy from different areas at different times, Smyrna was famous for being a modern, planned city, one of the first in the world, with far more beautiful architecture and amenities. Here you can see what remains of the city's state agora, where politicians and officials would come to carry out important business. The famous Roman writer Aelius lived here and described his hometown, saying that all the way down to the shore it is resplendent with gymnasia, agoras, theatres, sacred precincts and harbours, beautiful works of nature vying for those wrought by man. And there is nothing which does not serve both for ornament and for use. And just a little bit of the ancient stonework has been excavated, as you can see here. Smyrna was a city that was renowned for its amazing architecture, its fine wines, and its fresh air blowing in through the streets down from the sea. It was often referred to as being the crown of Asia by many ancient writers. And the main road that went through the city was called the Street of Gold, as it made its way through the town down from the Temple of Zeus. The Smyrnans would have been really very proud to live in such a scenic, beautiful town, and many of its people would have been desperate to climb up the city's ladders of power and influence in order to have a part in ruling over this great city from a position of power and high esteem. Smyrna was also a city that had really risen up from the ashes during its time. It was a place that had experienced complete destruction in its history, followed by rebirth. People have lived in this port area for the past 5,000 years or so, and it became a thriving Greek colony. But in about 600 BC, a Lydian king named Alyattes swooped down from the east with a great army and sacked the city, causing complete destruction wherever he went, and striking terror and fear into the lives and hearts of anyone unhappy enough to have been here. But then, a few hundred years later, Alexander the Great came along and decreed that the city should be reborn, built again from scratch. In fact, some of the local coins from ancient Smyrna depict Alexander sitting under a tree, having a dream that directed him to rebuild the city from its ashes. So, the Smyrnan people would have carried a deep understanding in their hearts that enduring destruction, only to come out again bigger and stronger, can result in unexpected beauty. Smyrna was also a strongly pagan city with a number of temples dedicated to the false Greek and Roman gods of antiquity. Zeus, Cybele, Apollo, Nemesis, and Aphrodite all had a dedicated base of followers here, but Smyrna was particularly famous for being one of the early founding cities of the emperor cult, that is, the worship of human Roman emperors as deities. The city had always been fiercely loyal to its Roman overlords, and they were very grateful for the Pax Romana, the long-lasting peace that Roman rule had finally brought to their lands. So, to further curry political favour with them, the Smyrnans made up their own new religion by which to worship the Roman state and its emperors, and the frightening thing was that local citizens were required to attend that temple once a year, place a pinch of incense on the altar, and publicly declare that Caesar is Lord. And so, Christians who rightfully refused to do this would find themselves on the wrong side of imperial law and also considered to be disloyal to the empire. The city of Smyrna was quite well known for having a large Jewish population who were especially influential and had substantial privileges, including special rights to assemble, to govern their own affairs, to have their own kosher food, and to keep the Sabbath. So when Christianity entered the scene, understandably, there was a bit of tension. A large number of Jewish people came to see that Jesus was the promised Messiah and converted. But some of those who didn't often played a part in getting Christians openly persecuted and certainly tried to make sure that they didn't continue to receive the established Jewish privileges. All kinds of misinformation and lies were spread about the Christians here, and oftentimes open persecution and angry mobs would rise up against them. As a result, Christians would often lose their position, jobs, or property, and they would fall into poverty, and in the ancient world, the gap between rich and poor was far bigger than we have it today. Even in the most beautiful city in the Roman Empire, among all the scenery and opulence, the poorest people sometimes starved to death. Let's open up the good book and see what Jesus had to say to his church in Smyrna. To the angel of the church in Smyrna write, "These are the words of the first and the last who died and came to life. I know your tribulation and your poverty, but you are rich, and the slander of those who say they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. Do not fear what you are about to suffer. Behold, the devil is about to throw some of you into prison, that you may be tested, and for 10 days you will have tribulation. Be faithful unto death, and I will give you the crown of life. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. The one who conquers will not be hurt by the second death." Well, Jesus' letter to the church in Smyrna is one of only two where he has only words of praise and encouragement for the local Christians who lived there. They probably weren't a perfect church by any means, if such a thing even exists, but they're holding together well in love and faithfulness as a church in a city that was physically beautiful, but where the local Christians were apparently in direct danger because of their faith. And so he starts by saying, "This is the message from the one who is the first and the last." And that's like a little reminder of something he said to John earlier in his vision, that he is the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last letters of the Greek alphabet, the language of the New Testament, and also of much of the ancient civilized world as it was back then. So, he's starting the whole message with a powerful affirmation of what Christians believed about him at that time and still believe about him today. The controversial and amazing truth that Jesus is both man and God. That he was there right from the very beginning of time itself, even existing outside of time, and he will be there to meet us and everyone else when our lives end, or when he returns, whatever comes first. He is the first and the last word about truth and love. He is the first and last word on right and wrong, on justice and on forgiveness, and he is Lord over the beginning and the end of time, and everything in between. And it was vital and encouraging for the church in Smyrna just to know that, and hold it in their hearts in the tough times that were to come. And he also reminds them that he is the one who died and came to life. And in a city that had such a history of death and destruction at the hands of the Lydian army, followed by new life when Alexander the Great showed up and ordered the city to be rebuilt, it's like Jesus is saying, what happened in your city is like what happened to me. Your city knows the pain and injustice of being attacked and ruined, and you Christians know the unfairness of persecution and slander, but through me, even the finality of death itself is defeated and conquered. Just as your city was rebuilt in the most beautiful way imaginable, planned and lovingly ordered, the new life I have for you at the end will be unimaginably perfect. He is asking the church in Smyrna to be brave, to have no fear even of death itself, for he will be there for them on the other side, and for all others who have come to him for forgiveness and for new life. He goes on to say, I know about your tribulation or suffering and your poverty, but you are rich. So, the church in Smyrna doesn't have money or resources, it doesn't have a big fancy church building or property, it doesn't even have a car park. But Jesus is saying, you are rich. Most Christians at this point in history were from the very poorest social classes. People of prominence or from affluent backgrounds would have had a lot to lose by converting. And the Christians who had converted and discovered their newfound faith would have to sacrifice a lot for that. They would have to sacrifice relationships, as some people, friends and family, turned their backs on them, had to sacrifice status and sometimes even their livelihoods. The local Jews had synagogues and special privileges. The rest of the population had huge and impressive temples with pagan ceremonies and drunken orgies, as much as they wanted, and the Christians have Jesus. That's it. They're materially poor, but spiritually rich. And when someone comes to discover what that really means to be spiritually rich, they tend to find out that that's all they ever really need in life. It's a bit like the situation with John the prophet, imprisoned on the island of Patmos. In the earthly place of Patmos, he was penniless and suffering, but in the spirit, he was on top of the world, meeting with the God who loved him. Jesus himself was penniless and poor, and yet he was so rich in love and spirit, so close to God. And the simple fact is that none of our power, position or possessions, none of what we own or the little empires we build up for ourselves will last beyond the grave. The only thing that will is our relationship with God through Jesus. Is your church rich in Jesus' eyes, or is it poor? I think the most faithful and obedient churches in the world are the ones that are ready to become poor, if that's what being faithful and obedient to Jesus would boil down to in their particular context. And that was almost undoubtedly the choice of the church in Smyrna. They probably could have decided to dumb down or compromise parts of the Christian message that the rest of the city clearly didn't like to keep themselves out of trouble, or at least keep their faith as private and hidden away as possible. But no. They remained faithful to Jesus' message and outgoing with it, even if trouble often seemed to follow behind. It's Christians and churches who are active and lively that end up facing opposition, not dusty and sleepy ones. Are you ever tempted to compromise your faith or to shy away from sharing it just to avoid getting in trouble or embarrassment? I know I am from time to time. As Christians, we never go out to deliberately seek trouble and persecution. We're called to try and be as peaceful and loving as possible in our relationships with anyone and everyone. But what if Jesus called you or your church to be more faithful to his message, or perhaps to do something new that meant giving away more time, more money, more people power for the growth of his kingdom? Obviously, I'm not advocating that churches recklessly start abandoning any important property or wise investments they might have. There's nothing wrong with those things in and of themselves. But do we have a heart to give away more of what we have if that's what's needed? To become poorer materially if it helps to grow God's kingdom, trusting in the knowledge that God will give back? Are we blowing all our money that God has given us to steward on fixing up exhausted buildings or keeping the church organ going for the sake of nostalgia, when there might be desperate missionary or charitable needs that God might be calling us to generously meet in the real world today? I've heard of churches in the UK looking to raise literally £1 million in order to get a new organ put in. That doesn't seem like a good priority. Just imagine how else that money could be used to grow God's kingdom. Giving away of ourselves is a decision some churches have to make when they feel called to do a church plant, to give away their money and some people power that they could have used for themselves to help start a new church in a place where those resources might be needed more. Whether a church is rich or poor is nothing to do with the quality of the building or the money in the bank or the number of bums on seats. The richest churches are those who are just loving and obeying Jesus, listening to his teaching and doing what he says. The richest churches are the ones who are working for the amazing privilege of seeing God's kingdom where they are increase, not the bank balance. And Jesus goes on. He says, I know about the slander, or some translations say blasphemy, of those who say they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. So, Jesus is telling them that he knows that there are lies and misinformation being deliberately spread about his church in Smyrna, but that ultimately, whoever might be doing it, it's inspired by Satan to slow down the forward movement of the gospel, to keep people out of churches, to keep people in spiritual darkness instead of walking in Jesus' light. And while the ancient Christians in Smyrna and across the world would not have been perfect at all, they would have been just like us, making mistakes sometimes and little hypocritical slip-ups, still a lot of lies and misinformation were spread about Christians in ancient times. One early rumour being spread around was that Christians were cannibals because they kept talking about eating the body and drinking the blood of Jesus Christ when they shared communion. People didn't understand what they meant and couldn't be bothered to find out, so they just shouted, "Cannibalism!" The sharing of communion was also known among Christians as the Agape feast, or the love feast, which led to other false rumours that Christians were sneakily, hypocritically getting together to have orgies. Another big accusation levied against ancient Christians were that they were atheists, oddly enough, because they didn't come to worship at the pagan temples anymore. So people were worried that Christians were somehow angering those Greco-Roman pagan false gods. And finally, among a few other things, Christians were accused of being disloyal to the state because the most faithful of them refused to make the required declaration that Caesar is Lord, in a way that meant you took him to be your God, a declaration that all citizens in Smyrna were expected to make once a year, which would put Christians in a dangerous situation which thankfully isn't encountered today. Or is it? Well, the persecution of Christians died down after it became the state religion of the Roman Empire, but in recent years it has returned with a vengeance in many places around the world. Nowadays, Christianity is easily the religion where the most people face hostility because of their beliefs. There are still some countries, such as North Korea, where the country's leader is treated as a deity to be worshipped, just like in Roman times, and Christians are sent to hard labour camps for not doing so, or simply for doing something as subversive as owning a Bible. There are still some communist countries and Muslim nations, disputed areas and war zones where Christians are very openly being targeted, either by local groups or by the state itself, accused of blasphemy for believing and lovingly declaring that Jesus is Lord. And it's getting worse and worse every year. Turkey, today, is technically a secular nation, but despite this country being the ancient centre of Christianity, nowadays there are very few Christians left, and living in such a strongly Muslim country, they face intolerance far greater than we could imagine on a social level. Secularism in Western Europe may be getting more and more aggressive, but a misunderstanding and oppression facing Christians in Turkey is something that's literally foreign to us. Well, we've seen that ancient Smyrna was a city of trouble and persecution for the Christians who lived there, and I was curious about what trouble or difficulties are faced by Christians in Turkey today. Jeremy Perigo is the Director of Music and Worship Programs at the London School of Theology, and his current research interests centre on Christian worship in the context of a Muslim majority. He spent a long time in Turkey with a church out there, so I wanted to ask him about his experiences.
Yeah, over the last 10 years, I've been very active in Turkey, living there, studying, writing my dissertation while I was there, but also really engaged with the small Turkish church there. There's between 3,000 to 5,000 Turkish believers there that are from a Turkish background and would consider themselves Protestant, evangelical, and so yeah, spent the last 10 years both studying, looking at how they worship, why they worship, looking at their theology and their experiences as a community. In Turkey, there's nearly 78 million people, and only a few thousand of those are Christians. So one of the big challenges, like any minority group, is social persecution. People don't recognize them even as a group. The saying says to be a Turk is to be a Muslim. So the even idea that there is Christians in Turkey that are Turks, that aren't Greeks or Armenians or Americans or Brits, but are actual Turks, doesn't really get into the normal thinking of the culture. So because of that, it's often difficult. There's lots of suspicion for Turks who are professing Christians. I can think of a pastor friend of mine who was one of the first Christians in his family and also in the city, and in a city of over 1 million people, was one of the first Turkish Christians, and he went to change his religion on his ID card, and they didn't know what to do. They didn't even have a process to do that, and he had to go through lots and lots of discussions to get to even get them to understand that this was a possibility. On the more challenging side, it's difficult for many Christians to get and keep jobs. As soon as benefits kick in, they're often, before those benefits kick in, they're often fired from their job. Others, it's difficult because it's on your ID card. It's difficult to rent a flat. And in other cases, there's more intense things. Churches have been set on fire. Pastors have been beaten. Currently, there's an American pastor who's been in Turkey for 20 years and deeply loves the Turkish culture and has raised his family there, but has been in prison during some of this new political changes there. So it's fairly safe for foreigners, and if you're going to visit, or even if you're like my family, there to encourage and serve the local church, we've never felt threatened in that sense. But for those locals who are there and a part of the culture, day-to-day life is challenging.
Are there any particular difficulties for someone who's converted to Christianity?
Yeah, often for those who have converted to Christianity, Turks, whether they're Kurdish background, Ottoman Turk, other the groups that they're, many of the folks in their families see that almost as, giving the middle finger. I mean, that type of intensity of leaving their whole family and everything they know. So their family often then too responds in anger and fear and control. I can think of an example of a friend of mine that when his family members found out he was a Christian and was going to a conference in the UK, his uncle and his brother grabbed him and threw them back in the back of the trunk and drove away with him. Luckily, his pastor was able to come and share as a Turk what it means that he isn't going to leave their family, and that it's just that he's found new life in his faith, and that softened the situation. But I can't even imagine what that would be like for a family member to throw me in the back of a trunk of a car to help me escape a situation that I thought was so important to me in my faith. And that's one of the really challenging things for those who convert, is the reaction of their family and being cut off from family ties.
These are our Christian brothers and sisters, and compared to them, we have things very easy indeed. It really is vital for us to uphold them in prayer, stand up for their rights whenever we can, and to think about supporting charities who do work in helping persecuted Christians around the world. Charities such as the Barnabas Fund, Open Doors, or International Christian Concern, I commend all of those to you. And so finally, in his letter to the church in Smyrna, Jesus encourages them, but also warns them of some very tough times that would be coming ahead. He says, "Do not fear what you are about to suffer. Behold, the devil is about to throw some of you into prison, that you may be tested, and for 10 days you will have tribulation. Be faithful unto death, and I will give you the crown of life." So, Jesus is being very plain and honest with them that a difficult time is coming. When he says it will last 10 days, he's using a common expression of the time, which meant it would just last for a little while, and that it would die down eventually. Persecutions of Christians at this time tended to be localized and sporadic, so Jesus could have been referring to a local outburst against the church that was to come, which we don't know about from history. But we certainly do know that Smyrna continued to be a dangerous place for the Christian church for many years. During a citywide persecution about 60 years later, one of Smyrna's earliest bishops, Polycarp, was burned at the stake and stabbed to death as well, for good measure. He had been offered the chance to renounce his faith in Jesus to save his own skin, but instead he said, 86 years I have served him, and he has done me no wrong. How can I blaspheme my King and my Saviour? And now the story of his life and death is famous. So Jesus was starkly warning them of the possibility of death. But even if persecutors tempted them to turn away and denounce him, well, Jesus' promise is that those who faithfully stick with their Saviour will be given something called the crown of life. What is that, the crown of life? Well, in the Greek language, there are two words for a crown. Firstly, the diadema, which meant a crown of royalty and lineage, the kind that Queen Elizabeth would wear. And secondly, the Stephanos, which is a crown of victory, and that's the word used here by John. The city of Smyrna was famous for its games and races held in a stadium, and the winners would receive a Stephanos crown of victory to wear to show that they had fought and conquered adversity. Also, when someone had finished a term as a magistrate or other highly respected civil servant in the city, as many influential people in Smyrna were keen to do, they would be honoured with a prestigious crown to wear. And isn't this the kind of crown that any of us would really crave? Who hasn't watched the Olympic Games and witnessed the final moments of a race that are the culmination of several athletes' professional lives and imagined what it would be like to be the one who endured the most and finally took home the coveted gold medal? Or who wouldn't want to be a great politician who was loved and respected and received visible recognition for what they achieved in office, get their face on banknotes like George Washington or Winston Churchill? Jesus is saying that those who keep in their faith, keep fighting the good fight, holding on to Jesus and being faithful to him in what they say and do, even to the point of death, they will have recognition from God himself. They will receive a crown in heaven, one that even the most illustrious Olympic athlete would envy. A crown, Jesus says, that is not made of precious metals or a laurel wreath, but made of life. It's a crown that's also referred to in the New Testament as the imperishable crown, the crown of righteousness, the crown of glory, the crown of rejoicing, a crown that lasts forever. The Stephanon tes Zoes, a crown made of life, where others who never came to Jesus for forgiveness will have to face judgment for their sins. Those who come and cling to him will receive life, and life eternal. For those who mocked and persecuted and hounded down Christians then and now, this life was the closest they would ever come to being in heaven. And for those Christians who endured tribulation and humiliation and even death at their hands, this life is the closest they would ever come to being in hell. Jesus' message to his church in Smyrna is so full of encouragement for them and for us, for anyone who might be facing adversity or who might fear facing adversity, which we all do sometimes. He's full of love and truth as he encourages us to keep on choosing to follow him, keep choosing the path of endurance and of spiritual life. No matter what life might throw at us, no matter what we might face up against, keep on choosing the crown made of life, even if it means making sacrifices in this world. Keep on being ready to endure hard times, and God will be with you.